My name is Riché Richardson. I'm an associate professor here at Cornell University in the Africana Studies and Research Center. I work in the fields of African American literature, gender studies, and Southern studies. And I focus specifically on questions related to race and gender in shaping identity formations in the African American context, and particularly in the United States South. I would say sometime in graduate school was when I became more invested in an academic career, meaning that when I first arrived at Duke University to work on my PhD in the English department in 1993, I would think of my future by saying that I'd keep one foot in the academy and one foot out. And by 1995, 2 years later, I would say that I had a vision of having both feet in for the long haul. Well, it's interesting because when I first started out as a graduate student working on my PhD, one thing that was important to me was this idea of what I articulated as taking the theory to the trenches, the idea that I thought that a lot of the ideas that we were studying and analyzing in our seminars and writing about in our papers were the very kinds that could potentially help to transform the surrounding culture. And so that was really one of my goals, and that vision shaped my investments in studying popular culture, writers such as Terry McMillan during my very first year of graduate school. And I would say that it's interesting to have come around or back around to those investments at this point, but for very different reasons as a Public Voices Fellow in the Op-Ed project, because I think that sharing my work with and engaging the public continues to be a very important intellectual value, and I think it feels all the more urgent now, not only in the wake of the election of Donald Trump as president, but it's really felt urgent since, I would say, for myself, the tragedy happened in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015 when Dylan Roof entered the Mother Emanuel Methodist Church and took the lives of 9 other parishioners, including the Reverend Clemente Pinckney. And so in the wake of that horrifically sad, tragic moment, I was invited to write an op-ed for the New York Times about other symbols that need to go. And so at that point I talked about Aunt Jemima. And so that was my first formal experience with writing an op-ed, but it was just very important to think about the residue of Aunt Jemima in the culture, and even how she as a symbol was linked to Confederate nostalgia that was more broadly critiqued, that was being critiqued more broadly in the culture at that time. And so once I became a fellow with the Op-Ed project, I picked up where I left off. And so earlier this year, I began to reflect on the toxic climate that Donald Trump has fomented in the culture through his hate-filled diatribes. And so that concern and the way that it's opened the door yet again to organizations like the Ku Klux Klan was a main concern for me. Right, because the climate does matter. I mean, I think that as a university professor, the vast majority of us are working with students and impacting and influencing them in the process. And so I would say that we have a responsibility to help equip them with the tools that they will need to navigate this very ideologically complex and confusing public sphere. And so if I can provide them with any tools, any materials that will facilitate that process. I definitely want to be prepared to do that as a scholar. And I do that and have those investments at a local level, but I think that participating in the Op-Ed project allows me to send the message in an even broader way that there are definitely clear connections between the rhetoric that we hear in our political arena and the choices that some people make to act out violently and harm others. So that message has come across, and I definitely want to be among the chorus of people echoing it and drawing particularly on my areas of expertise and skills to do so. One issue that I really became passionate about speaking out about related to California Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Representative Maxine Waters, whom I have admired for a long time and really value all of the ways in which she has advocated for her constituents in California. I'm a former California resident myself, not in her district, but definitely I feel very empowered that people like her and Barbara Lee have done such an extraordinary job in articulating what is at stake for their local constituency, but then also advanced national conversations in certain instances, and so that both of them put pressure on the Senate to reconsider the electoral vote as that last step that could be taken before Donald Trump's inauguration in January, and were not backed up, I think spoke volumes, and I will respect them for the rest of my life for speaking out. And so that moment was really clear in my mind early in the year. And when Representative Waters was critiquing and taking Donald Trump to task for his politics and was attacked by Bill O'Reilly and subsequently reduced to her hairstyle in his comparison of it to James Brown, like a James Brown wig, I thought it was horrendous, and it was just deeply unsettling to the extent that it rehearsed the typical ways in which black women and other women of color, and even women in general, can be reduced to visual aesthetics and have their voices silenced. And so a sense of outrage and indignation about how he actually spoke about her was one thing that catalyzed me to write the op-ed in the moment that I did. Yeah, the referenda about hair are never really about hair was basically the point of that. I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, and the issue is that it's been such a recurrent way of humiliating black women in the nation's public sphere, so that when Gabby Douglas, as a black teen, made her historic win in the all-around in London in 2012, we had this outpouring on Twitter, at least allegedly, criticizing her hairstyle. A very similar thing happened to Simone Biles over the summer, and it just really is almost like routinized behavior where the body is allowed to become so ubiquitous that it ends up usurping and silencing the place of the voice. Well, one bright light in recent times has been the outcome of the election in France. I feel that something about the humanist spirit and mission was conserved in that moment and protected. And so the fact that the Le Pen family and what they represent as far as being associated with the far right didn't hijack politics in France, in a way helped me to hold on to a hope that was in some ways receding and disappearing, I think, as a result of all of the shenanigans that we witness on a daily basis in the public sphere. And the other hopeful thing for me, actually, at this point, is California too. I mean, I continue to be blessed by the life I lived in California for 10 years. I was on the faculty in the University of California at UC Davis for the first 10 years of my academic career from 1998 to 2008. And so I arrived here at Cornell in 2008. But what I'm saying is that in California, I saw the very best, the worst too, in the public sphere, and know its potential to be reactionary. But I think it's interesting at this point that California is leading. You know, under the governorship of Jerry Brown, I think that they're setting an example. And if we think about maybe where they've been even in just more recent years, or the past generation, with the passage of reactionary legislation such as Proposition 187, Proposition 209, and then having a more reactionary public sphere on some fronts, we've seen a full circle of sorts unfold. And I think that what's happening there is indicative of what can possibly happen in the nation more generally, where regardless of the divided public sphere, there's hope for the nation to come back together. So California, for me, at this point, is a beacon. And I'm proud of, how subversive it's being in the midst of all of this as a state. It's quite a privilege. I mean, it's really functioning as a think tank of sorts in the best possible sense. And I think that it's really wonderful to have access to so many different great minds and from a range of disciplinary perspectives. And so I've been profoundly enriched by the experience. I think it's helped to make me a better and stronger writer. But it's also, I think, been gratifying to see the victories of my colleagues in the program.